thoughts to this session around how to be connected during moments of unrest in your city. It happened in Baltimore in the spring of 2015 with the death of Freddie Gray while in police custody. And very quickly, one of the first things that happened in the days leading after some of the protesting and the unrest that occurred in Baltimore, the media had found a lot of the data that we put out every year in the Vital Signs Report and started to display it in all kinds of contexts to try and explain the neighborhood that Freddie Gray had been picked up in. The neighborhood was called Sandtown, Winchester, and our data has the names of the neighborhoods. We don't report things at the census tract level. We report them aggregatedly into what are called communities. And the Sandtown, Winchester community profile ended up getting a lot of media coverage, both locally and internationally. We normally had been pretty passive in the way we report our own findings on social media, but clearly we needed to get in front of some of the media coverage and in some cases actually correct some of the media coverage that was using our data in a pretty sensationalistic ways. And so we became pretty active on both Facebook and Twitter. I think we doubled our followers on both of those and started to really engage with our followers in ways that we hadn't done in the past. And our followers started to notice, and we were able to engage very quickly with kind of a broad cross-section of both people inside and outside of Baltimore. But after that, it became very clear that we had to get in front of a potential message and not be so reactive. And so we moved from what you might call kind of passive data dissemination to say, here's the data, to really more active data dissemination to try and help people understand what the data actually means. And so based on several different projects that we had been working on, we put together a synthesis of several different research works that we had just completed in the last couple of years to really explain why neighborhood context matters so much in the face of this kind of civil unrest. We have a very clear message now, no matter what the context or who the audience is, we say the same three things and the same three goals that we have for every single neighborhood now in the city of Baltimore, and clear quantitative ways that every neighborhood could potentially achieve these three goals. The first goal is to increase housing diversity in every neighborhood. That if you have a range of houses at different price levels, you will, by definition, have people living in those neighborhoods at different income levels. So you have economic diversity, which we have shown in the region is clearly linked to racial diversity as well. And the best educational outcomes for the children living in those neighborhoods with high economic and racial diversity. And then we talked about vacant and abandoned housing and making sure that we address that in neighborhoods of high vacancy. And the final one is looking at the travel time to work and making sure that we reduce these long commute times for neighborhoods that are actually right in the middle of the city of Baltimore. So having a clear message, going from passive data dissemination to active data dissemination, helped us get in front of groups that we normally didn't really have access to. We started to present to, for example, the Maryland Bankers Association. We started to present to business leadership groups. And that cross-fertilization of our very clear, very uniform message, no matter who the audience was, started to get it very noted that we had a message, that we had a point, that we had something that can help neighborhoods actually move forward, and organizations that wanted to help neighborhoods, just not from the inside, but also from the outside. So moving forward, that's the takeaway of how to be ready when certain situations might occur in your city and you're called upon to make some expert advice for people that don't normally look at community-based information. Hope you have a great conference in Indianapolis, and I look forward to seeing all of you on the webcast. Bye-bye.
While Sarah pulls up the next presentation, turn around to the cameras and wave since she's watching the webcast.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jay Wu. I'm from Houston, Texas. I work at the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice University. So today, I'm going to talk about how Kinder staff responded during and after the Hurricane Harvey, and also how the storm affected the priorities in the near term and immediate term and going forward. So, Hurricane Harvey, Category 4 storm that made landfall on a Saturday, August 26th, and according to the Moody's analytics, the total cost, financial cost, is more than 100 billion. But we have seen several different estimates. To be honest, I don't know how, they don't share much about the methodology, and we don't know exactly how that number, they come up with this number. So this is why, we're called to provide more information. So this is a map showing the rainfall, the total rainfall during 3 days, August 25th to August 27th. What you see is different level of rainfall across the county. This is a Harris County map. And just to talk a little bit about the city-county dynamics, we don't have UniGov like here in Indy. So the majority of the city of Houston is within Harris County area. So the city is responsible, for city of Houston, and then the Harris County government is responsible for area outside of city of Houston within Harris County. So in the past 3 years, we've been through 3 500-year floods, and also the intense downpours in the past kind of doubled in the frequency in the past 3 years, many of which, strained the stormwater drainage capacity across the city. So what you see is just a rainfall number, but you don't know exactly which area was impacted the most. And also one thing just to mention is that the majority of waterway actually is within city of Houston. So our estimate is like about 10% of population in Harris County got affected, at least. And then within city of Houston, it's more than 15%. So this is a picture. I was stranded at home. I live in a master planned subdivision, which is 50 miles away from Rice University, which is in the central Houston. So it is not too far from city of Houston, but it is in the suburban area. It's called Pearland, Texas. Because the subdivision was built after 2001, which is when Storm Allison hit Houston. So they intentionally built retention pool ponds and the lakes, in the subdivision. But you see, this is a picture I got from a friend in city of Pearland government. They sent out airplane, and this is not too far away from where I live. My house is kind of like the upper left corner. But actually, not many houses were flooded. I mean, the water didn't go into the house, but they were kind of on the street, and you can see a car was under the water. They parked on the street, and it got flooded. So I was stranded at home, and Bill Fulton, our director, was stranded in a midtown apartment on the 5th floor. It's fine, but you cannot go anywhere. And then our senior editor, Leah, Binkovich, she actually evacuated from the city because they have a 1-year-old. They don't want to take any risk. So she actually drove all the way to Minnesota, where her mom is. Oh, sorry, I forgot Mimi. Mimi, my colleague, she had a planned trip to Seattle and rescheduled the flight, so she flew out, I think on Friday, August 25th. So the first thing we did, just want to make sure all our staff are okay. We have about 20 staff at the Institute, and more than that, affiliated researchers. But because we've been through so many floods, our university actually built a good system to communicate with staff members. So that's one thing, how we rely on that communication and make sure that everyone is okay. I would say among the 20 plus staff members, I think 3 or 4 got impacted significantly because of the hurricane. So how do we decide on the content in the near term just after this hurricane? I was called several times and also got, first, we're lucky we have power. We have electricity. There's no power outage in my neighborhood. And I have Wi-Fi. So I just consider it is a day working from home. I got phone calls, emails, text messages asking me about neighborhood level information, especially those requests from national media. Although we are the 4th largest city in the country, not many people know about the context in Houston, and also different neighborhood, what the demographic looks like. So we first, sorry, I went too far. We should say first, during the hurricane, we identified the frequently asked questions from Harvey victims, right? Status of flooding and infrastructure, shelter information, traffic, real-time traffic, and the grocery store information. We identified the data sources, but most of them are duplicative and not easy to use. And so we want to create easy-to-use map and create map layers. So this is something we did during the hurricane, utilizing ArcGIS online. And thanks to Mingming, she did most of work from Seattle. So the first thing here is we call it TransStar. It's a real-time traffic information. We have cameras in all the major on the major highways and the major streets. So the system they built, it's not easy to use. Not all the information's on one map. You need to go through several things, and also to look at the image. So we created this one, and also the next 3 tabs. I'm sorry, it's pretty small font here, the shelter information. Because we don't have the capacity to assess the data quality, so instead we provide all 3 information so people can cross-referencing. And the last one is the grocery store information. Our local news media did a pretty good job putting together a list, but not a map. So we created it based on the information we get from the local media. And also, I mentioned this, so we received a request from national media such as New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. At the time, we were in the preparation of a neighborhood level indicator system. So we decided to launch it earlier, the test site, make it available to everyone so that they don't need to just call me and they have the information right there. And also, so this is, we call it, it's www.datahouston.org, but at the time we were only able to launch the test site. So we were not able to track the usage of it. But later, when we launched the site formally, within 5 days, I think we received more than 5,000 visits. And also this is just a snapshot afterwards. The original version is not like this, but what we did actually add a layer using the Fema modeled data. But I can talk more about the lessons learned. It's not easy to understand what Fema model data mean. So just go quickly. So Urban Edge, that's our blog post. During the hurricane, we looked at all the blog posts we produced in the last couple of years because flooding is a main issue, and we talk about the impact on the affordable housing units and the different neighborhood, especially disadvantaged neighborhood. So we decided to repost some of the blog posts and also at the same time, communicate with the community what we have done. So after the flooding, we reviewed the data catalog and also research products in the pipeline. So one issue in the national news media, they were talking about because Houston doesn't have a zoning law, but actually we have a de facto zoning system, which works in a way that regulates all the development. Because this is a report, so we planned to release in September. So we did it and added some discussion about the Hurricane Harvey issues and the impact. Another thing is that our RISE researchers, faculty members, although they were impacted, their house got flooded, they went out and collected water samples. It's, because otherwise you just miss the time frame on collecting data. And also they did some really interesting research. One thing we produced and published is in the different E. coli levels across the city. And when all the staff member went back to work, we had like research meetings and brainstorming research ideas. One thing we decided to do is that besides working on the PDF report for the city government who want us to do some damage assessment, initial damage assessment, we want to make sure that we disseminate the information to the general public. It's transparent. We don't want to just do it for the city government, but share the information with everyone. But the PDF report is not easy to use, so we decided to create a story map and also create a Harvey-related data portal so that we can share all the data we have with everyone. So this is the internal data inventory. We have a system called Urban Data Platform, which is data in the spatial library. So we look at what data assets we have in-house, and also created, we call it HCDC gallery, just a collection of story maps. So this is what the story map looks like for Hurricane Harvey. And we promote the URL so everyone can easily remember it, and we update all the information. And this is the Harvey-related data portal. Some of the data assets we downloaded for trusted website and clean it up and make it available to everyone. And because of the internal capacity, we're not able to do everything. So we also put the external link, but we did a pretty good job assessing the data quality. And so it's not a long list, actually 20-something data sets. I'll just quickly talk about the impact, how this might affect our near or medium-term work and the priorities. Definitely our research agenda got disrupted because of this. For example, the city and the mayor and the county judge set fund with a local philanthropic foundation. It's called the Greater Houston Community Foundation. And so far they have raised, I think, 84 million, and the projected number, I think, will be over 100 million. So how are they going to allocate the resources in a, evidence-based way, So they asked us to do needs assessment, and it's a quick turnaround, 3 months. So the first reports we need to produce within 20 days, which is, very intense. Sorry. And also, we consider adding more Harvey-related indicators to our HCDC portal, although we are not sure whether, it is us who will track the progress made after Hurricane Katrina, but definitely we want to provide some indicators for the community to track the progress. Other thing related is more about research agenda and how we disseminate and communicate. We have a pretty good communication team. And I want to thank the National Neighborhood Indicator Partnership. I benefited a lot from it, and also talked to our local partner in New Orleans and other NNIP alum to learn more from them, and the community trust and other thing. We have pretty good street credit, and and also we invested a lot in building relationship with local media, local government agencies, and the community organizations. So they consider us as a good neutral independent research think tank, which is very important. And during the process, we want to address open data, transparency issues, because if you know about Houston, there's some issues around that. The open data portal is not that great, And here's just a list of tools for faster and more effective disaster responses. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Denice Ross, and I'm a Public Interest Technology Fellow at New America. But 12 years ago, my colleague Allison Plyer, who's now Chief Demographer at the New Orleans Data Center, and Joy Bonaguro, who is now Chief Data Officer with the City of San Francisco, and I were in front of colleagues at NNIP talking about the impact of Hurricane Katrina on New Orleans at the DC meeting. And so with this presentation, I've dusted off those slides that we used at that time. And so it was a month out after Katrina. Neither Allison nor I had been home since the storm. She knew she had several feet of flooding. I knew a couple of trees had fallen on my house, but we hadn't been home yet. But we knew that coming to the NNIP meeting would be really helpful for us to connect with our peers around the country to help chart a path forward in such uncertain times. So we put on some secondhand clothes and came to DC, and it was the first time we'd seen each other since the storm too. So it was really pivotal for us to get back on our feet and start doing the hard work of recovery. Just for a little bit of context, though, before I go into those old slides, we had a few things going for us. The first is that we had always taken a very user-centered approach. The second is we had tremendous local credibility in the community. We had lots of content on our website, so we were highly optimized for search engines. And our focus at that point was on federal data. Our website had a couple of thousand pages in it. You could actually put it on a CD and carry it around. So it had lots of HTML content. For the 73 neighborhoods in New Orleans, we had data snapshots for each of the 73 neighborhoods. You could download a spreadsheet that would give you more detail. And we also had written 73 snapshots for each of these neighborhoods, which made us very easy to find when people were looking for information on New Orleans neighborhoods. We had a feature called Ask Allison, where community members could reach out to us to ask questions about data. This was our staffing configuration when the storm hit. Joy Bonaguro was in San Diego, where she lived and worked remotely for us, and the 4 of us remaining members of the team were in New Orleans. For the immediate response, we had some great continuity of operations, not because of planning, but because of happenstance. Our server was in Kentucky, and Joy was remotely working, and she could hold down the fort while we evacuated. We were monitoring emergent user needs using web statistics and the Ask Allison feature, and bumping up, like Jay did, relevant data products we'd already published, and answering media requests. On Thursday before the storm, it hit the edge of Florida, then went into the Gulf, and by Saturday we knew it was going to hit us straight on. So what we did is we evacuated to safe places, and Joy basically kept things running while we were en route. The storm kept heading our way, and on Monday morning it hit. For the record, it wobbled to the east and was not a direct hit on New Orleans. We actually caught the good side of the storm. It was the federal levees, the infrastructure that failed and caused the flooding. Meanwhile, Joy was monitoring the web statistics and noticed that a lot of people were looking for information on elevation by neighborhood. So she made a map of elevation by neighborhood. I user tested it with fellow evacuees in the business center at the La Quinta Inn in Webster, Texas, and we published it. We also noticed there was a lot of discussion about neighborhoods and the differences between them, so we started bumping up data, for example, on neighborhood level poverty, and we kept the data refreshed on our website. Joy was updating it hourly for several days. On Tuesday, we realized that we wouldn't be going home anytime soon. 80% of our city had flooded, and the questions were flooding in as well. We got a lot like this. This is from the EPA. They were looking for the neighborhood shapefile. This from a journalist at the Wall Street Journal trying to understand the difference between the lower Ninth Ward, upper Ninth Ward, and all the local terminology. And we got too many emails like this. And like this one. Now, the technology's changed since 2005, and now it's social media, Twitter, and Facebook, where people are flailing on the internet looking for immediate response. And this makes me very angry to see what's happening repeatedly with storms, where the emergency management community doesn't have their ducks in a row and isn't accommodating modern technology and how they respond to people. The solutions are there. We just need to figure this out, and this really should be an all-hands-on-deck endeavor during blue skies. But we did what we could, and so what Joy did is she vetted the best resources to answer these people. She answered every single email inquiry that we got, and she published frequently asked questions. We also noticed our audience was shifting from New Orleans to the nation. Our daily visits spiked, especially that large spike is when our executive director was on CNN. In the course of a little over a month, we had twice the number of visitors we used to get in an entire year. And even 3 years out, we were still at double our baseline traffic. Our audience used to be very narrow, nonprofits, community-based organizations, local foundations. It exploded to include federal agencies, national nonprofits, and the media. Going forward, though, we had a pretty clear idea of what we needed to do. We define our new audience, determine their information needs, and inventory emerging data sets. Then as we shifted into short-term recovery, we also realized that we needed to focus more on state and local data resources. We started to do open data advocacy before open data was even a thing. And we were grateful to partner with national think tanks like Urban and PolicyLink and Brookings. And those partnerships sharpened our skills and gave us a national platform that the city really needed for this long haul. Our citizens had scattered to the winds, and that the federal statistics we used to rely on were no longer relevant. And in fact, Matt Fellows at the Brookings Institution had commented it was easier gathering data about the recovery of Iraq than it was New Orleans. And we certainly felt that pain at the local level. We did collaborate with Brookings on the New Orleans Index, first at a monthly pace, and then eventually down to an annual report. And I encourage you to check out this awesome article by Amy Liu and Allison Plyer about the value of this type of report for tracking progress after disasters. And I think that's in your bound notebooks, yeah. We also started to track assets, like Jay was talking about, open grocery stores, clinics, childcare centers, schools, and whatnot. So as we shifted into long-term recovery, we realized we needed to get more innovative with the data sets. It'd been a long time since Census 2000, and we needed to fill a gap. Also decommissioning data products as they were no longer needed because the situation was still rapidly changing. Some staff, including myself, ended up jumping inside of local government to liberate the data that we just couldn't get out. And we ramped up media and social media strategy with great coaching from the Brookings Institution. And we started to leverage anniversary journalism to keep the national consciousness on New Orleans over the years. Some of these innovative data approaches included participating in crowdsourcing efforts by local neighborhoods and helping to bring some rigor to that work. Looking for unusual sources of data like the households actively receiving mail from the company that sends you your junk mail. We turned that into a thin, lightweight app that allowed neighborhoods to track repopulation block by block. And then on the decommissioning of data products front, it gets really tricky as you get further from a disaster because you can no longer compare to pre-Katrina, for example. And so these gray dots on the map describe what we called ghost dots, and that was schools that had no longer reopened. But some years out, the ghost dots were no longer relevant because new schools were being built on different sites. So we had to decommission products and change the conversation. At the 5-year anniversary, we made a conscious decision to start looking forward toward the future and stop focusing exclusively on pre-Katrina comparisons. One thing that became really clear to us is that even though all of those things on the right-hand side, PDFs, printed reports, and whatnot, are necessary for documenting the data that we were creating, it was mainstream media. It was television, morning news shows, radio, talk radio, newspapers that truly allowed us to democratize this data to change the conversation at the local level. And so looking forward, resilience for the future, the data centers, keeping its commitment to user-centered design and traditional media engagement and maintaining its local credibility, but adding a more savvy use of social media, focusing on new data frontiers, and most importantly, addressing the hard issues head-on. And in New Orleans, the hard issue is racial equity, and that's crucial for making sure that when additional shocks and stressors come New Orleans' way, that people will no longer be left behind. And I encourage you to talk to the new executive director, Lamar Gardier, who's standing over there, because he's got tremendous vision on this, and I'm really excited to see what happens next. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Denice. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Seema. So as you're familiar with the NNIP meetings, the way we work these sessions is as the moderator, I get to ask a few questions, and I will keep asking questions until I start to see hands of folks that are interested. So I'm going to take one or two, and then we'll ask for hands, and we'll see what you all want to hear about here.
And I'll just mention, Jake, that we can go 15 minutes over if there's conversation. So we won't.
Excellent. So a couple things. First of all, just two things I want to emphasize. And Denice referenced one of the articles. The resource page, the resources listed in the framing page for this have a lot of really great reading. They talk very specifically about what Seema shared in terms of how BNIA is taking a direct approach to having these three positions that they're taking from the data that they use. A lot of the really cool stuff, Jay, that you're putting out is put in the links there, and a lot of the reflection Denice you shared are linked up there as well. I also think it's super interesting because we're gonna talk a lot about how this is relevant for the partners, but to take a step back and see the maps that you both made to see how personal this was for both of you too. So either whether you want to speak to this question from an organizational perspective or just from your own as people who live this. I guess I want to start the conversation with what kind of thoughts do you have about what kind of new data or data tools do we need now to respond to
Okay. And so, because there's some limitation in the FEMA model, the data we got at the beginning, understanding how they create a model and how accurate in terms of assessing the damage in various areas in Houston. We were looking for area imagery and remote sensing data. This is not an area that I'm familiar with, but luckily, Ming Ming's background is in GIS, and she has some good knowledge about what this type of data can be useful in terms of understanding FEMA's model data and come up with a general idea, what percentage underestimated. So a lesson learned from sharing the FEMA model data layer with the general public. Again, because the limitation of the data, just from the researcher's perspective, we want to create that layer overlay to the all different kinds of socioeconomic status indicators, so that for the community organizations, they can look at the vulnerable population where they are, so that they can make some strategies, which areas they should deploy their team and talk to people on the ground. But because that layer is it is like at a parcel level. People put it in their address and look at it as like, my house got affected, was flooded, why it is not on that layer, without reading the fine prints about what that means. So we actually got many emails, and also this is the feedback from the community organization. They were saying that, what happened. So in response to that, we created a crowdsourcing app to collect information from the community, saying that, okay, if your house got affected, but you don't see it on this layer, can you put down the information so that it helps us better understand the damage in different areas?
That's great, and I would add that there are sort of 3 frontiers of data that I think could help for more robust response and recovery, and the first one is definitely crowdsourcing. So Miami, for example, we saw that the city planning department, along with volunteers, were crowdsourcing the height of the high water marks so that they could improve their FEMA, their flood map models because FEMA's haven't been updated in a long time. So creating lightweight ways for citizens to participate in creating data that will be useful for their own recovery is one. The second is having availability of near real-time local data from city and county governments and from nonprofits and private businesses serving the areas. That can fill a lot of the gaps when you are flying blind in the absence of federal statistics and everything you used to take for granted has changed. And lastly, I think there's a great frontier in data philanthropy. For example, I would love to see the credit card companies donate card swipe data so that you could see which businesses are operating, not the amounts of their sales or any detailed information, but just which businesses are open, where are the pharmacies and the hardware stores, grocery stores, the critical assets that citizens need to return.
So you've started to create a little bit of a wish list for data here. I wonder if you could also then both speak to how we actually, and maybe this is your chance to ask these folks for help, what can we do to encourage that type of data transparency, both in government, but also in this concept of data philanthropy in the private and nonprofit sectors as well?
Yeah, and there I think it's storytelling. The reducing the risk for local governments to open data on permitting, for example, demonstrating that your peers around the country, that those cities are releasing this data in an open, machine-readable, near real-time format. And also, I think the nonprofit sector, they play such an important role in the recovery, but there hasn't hasn't been a call for transparency in the work that they're doing. For example, the Red Cross shelters, my understanding is that you have to scrape that data. It's not an open format to get the Red Cross shelter data. So starting to change the conversation and set expectations with those local data owners so that they know that they should be doing this during blue skies, and they should definitely be ramping it up during disasters.
I would say it may take some time to change the culture in terms of open data. People have different definition of what open data means, and so definitely, we need to talk to the local government to inform them, more data democratization, the better for the community, because in Houston, we have a pretty good city tech group. Thinking about researchers, all the researchers in Texas Medical Center areas, and all the research analysts and GIS experts in oil and gas businesses, they are pretty active in the community, digging deep what kind of data they have, and being very creative using that data. So from what I learned from them is one struggle is open data. So that's one thing. And the other I want to mention is that Houston has a pretty good culture of philanthropy. Not many people are aware of that, but we have pretty strong local philanthropic foundations, and they coordinate with each other. They have very good relationship with each other. Even that one foundation may not be able to fund the entire project, they put all the money together to fund it and advocate, for the better quality of life in the community. So I consider them as one of our partners, to address the importance of open data, and also, it's a key stakeholder.
Yeah, do we want to start to get questions from the audience here? Kathy's got a microphone. She's got other way.
I was really impressed with how prepared you were in Houston, and I wonder if part of that was because of your two previous 500-year floods. I mean, it seemed like you were ready to go with Harvey, and in Seattle, we're going to have a big earthquake someday, and we've got all these emergency preparedness things, but in no way are we as ready as you were. Was that because of your previous floods, or are you just always so prepared?
Louis, ready in what way? Ready on the
ready
shelters?
With the data.
Or?
Ready with, to put the data up.
I would say, because there are several things in the pipeline, and that's what we just say, speed up to make it available to everyone. And also flooding is always an issue, in Houston. And also about housing, we have collected a pretty good, set of a list of data sets around housing issues. So that's why, we're kind of prepared. But in terms of the citywide, it's not prepared. Lessons learned. One lesson learned is that when your leader is confused, people are confused. What I mean is that, there's no built communication systems in Houston that, how you communicate with your citizens in terms of providing, updates and provide them some guidelines, what to do. But the citizens, the residents are pretty prepared. No one got panicked, I believe, everyone is, very calm and ready to help each other. And I think that's because of the previous experience. And I can share one interesting story if we have time. So in the Asian community in Houston, we have this tradition of a dragon boats race. So all the team members that have boats at home, actually that is a big help during the hurricane rescue effort. So the city was not prepared in a way to provide the boats for rescue purpose. So they shared it on the social media, Twitter, and asking people to, donate boats for rescue. So, okay.
You have another question?
I have a related question about emergency preparedness. So it seems like a lot of these tools could be useful before the fact. And I was wondering if you've been approached at all by government, or if you haven't been, if there are a few indicators that you think would be most useful from a planning perspective versus the management perspective.
One thing I can say is that when a disaster happens, nobody wants to use a new tool. And so spinning up new tools in the wake of a disaster is probably sometimes it's necessary, but it's generally your last choice. So one thing that I did do in your packet, I put together, I wrote an article for Slate on sort of the high value open data for disaster recovery. And in that, I linked to a spreadsheet where I sort of tapped the wisdom of the Hive to figure out what are the high-value data sets for recovery. And most of them are things that are just good business, like having open data on permitting, for example. So if you're doing that in the course of your regular business, you just ramp it up when a disaster happens. The other value of the open data is that if the data is being published in an open format, then government doesn't have to create all of the end user tools. You can tap into the civic tech community to create thin, lightweight apps as needed.
Yeah, I agree with what Denice said.
Yeah, two related questions real quick. Following up on hers, there's a number of federal initiatives going on right now to create geospatial data resources. One that comes to mind immediately is the Fema Geo Platform. Are you familiar with that? So I know Chris Vaughn, the Fema GIO, is keenly interested in local data resources. Some of the things that you had stood up, grocery stores and things like that being open, are things that I know are on the Fema Geo Platform now, for example. And one of the problems, I do a lot of work in emergency management. One of the problems that I know that communities have is trying to figure out what's the authoritative data resource. So you guys obviously have some great information, but there's a lot of other web resources that are popping up out there. In Harvey, I got 3 different media phone calls from national, local, and so forth, newspapers and televisions, asking questions, and they were getting all kinds of different answers. And as a result, because all the subject matter experts were out there using different data resources, all kinds of different numbers were coming out. So that's one question, what are you doing to try to bridge that gap, not just look at what they can do for you, but what can you do for them in providing information? And that applies federally as well as state and regional, because I know FEMA Region 6 is keenly interested in local data as well. But also, my other question is, we're talking about response and recovery, but I would think mitigation might be a part of the picture as well. So when communities are doing mitigation plans, are you at the table as a stakeholder telling the communities, and I would recommend we all are, what it is you know about the socioeconomic characteristics of your individual communities, so that that actually gets into the plans and enables the communities to be more resilient, so that we're not talking about what happened in Harvey, Irma, and so forth, but what we did to mitigate what we could. Because we can't eliminate disasters, but we certainly can reduce their impacts. Thanks.
Why don't we start with the first question around how do you position yourself when there's a lot of different voices coming in saying they're the authoritative source?
Yeah, and that's a complicated field. And even for the same types of data sets, you might have multiple data sources that could be considered authoritative. And I think this is where building the open data culture before the storm is so valuable. So for example, business data, license data from the state, or credit card swipe data from credit card companies to identify open businesses. And I over time, I think I've come to value the importance of the data owners publishing the data themselves with context that explains the strengths and limitations of that data, and then pointing would-be users to that canonical data source. Because when you start to aggregate it, you lose a lot of that context. And also what we've seen is that the data owner then might say that you're not using their data because you're using aggregated or even sometimes out-of-date version of your data set. Timeliness and clear statement of when the data what date the data represent is super crucial when you have rapidly changing situations. So we actually, on our asset maps, designed a stamp that looks like the stamp that you see on meat when it's going to go bad. It said best used by with the date, and then that became our publication cadence, is we would always publish a new map. So if someone showed up at a meeting with an out-of-date PDF, then they could download the new one. But the data supply chains on the ground are that's our weakest point, because it's so extremely federated and there's so much variability in data quality.
Jay, you're right in the middle of this now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to add two things. One, definitely we're struggling because it is hard to assess the data quality because lack of data documentation. So, you need to call the data provider to find out the details, the context, and because of lack of, internal capacity, we cannot do it for every data set. That's why when we create a data portal, we selected a few that we can do and provide the data documentation, although the original data provider may not have that in place. So that's what I see value added in terms of creating that data portal. The other thing is that we're considering working with community organizations who are willing to collect information from the community. So we want to do like a coordinated survey using the same standard intake form in terms of assessing different needs of different Harvey victims. So that later on we could combine all the information and have a good sense how much needs are in the community and where they are.
And his second question was about mitigation planning, and I want to actually hijack your question just a little bit and also ask you to speak to the role that our organizations can also play in involving resident voice when you're at those tables as well. So I guess it's both speaking to how do you get at those tables and also what can our role be in involving resident voices in that.
And so in New Orleans after the storm, that was an opportunity to have these conversations. I don't think we did as good of a job as we could have. It was complicated times, but there were multiple planning initiatives that took place, and we participated in all of them. A lot of community meetings for many years, and consistently bringing data to the table while we were also building the capacity of residents in neighborhoods to have an active voice in all of those settings.
When we provide data, we also consider qualitative rather just than quantitative or qualitative data, and we kind of rely on the relationship with the community organizations who has done some work in this area because there's so many. Well, we're only one research institution. We cannot participate in all the meetings, so we kind of rely on the community organizations to share the information with us, and we'll try to combine that information with the quantitative data and provide like a one-page, two-page, report to the policymakers to understand what we are dealing with. I would say, in terms with Hurricane Harvey, it hit the population in general, like 1/3 of low income, 1/3 of middle income, and 1/3 of, higher income categories. And so, but we want to address the needs of the vulnerable population definitely because they have limited disposable income to recover from it.
Seren?
Is kind of related to the discussion that we are having, and some of them you might have already addressed. But since looking at the quick turnaround time of after the disaster struck and how the data portal was revised and the information was available to the public, my question is, is that all based on only the open data that is available at that snapshot at that time, or If not, then it definitely requires a very strong collaborative relationship between different agencies in the area. And if you all had already those collaborative, like a consortium in place, or of course you did not, you could not build it within a couple of days to have that data up there. So what were the challenges of getting up-to-date data from various agencies, or is there a way everyone shares it to a common platform, or what kind of networks are in place to make that happen?
I think Houston is in a much better position than we were because we'd relied almost solely on federal data. We didn't have deep connections with local data stewards. Our focus was almost entirely on our user population. So it was in many times making cold calls. And I will say, as the cycles of the recovery and the data to feed those different cycles came and went, we chose to sit some out. So for the most part, in the immediate response, we were just recycling data that we already had, and we weren't going to try to jump too much into that fray. And that's, when you have a small team, that being strategic and saying no to some things and realizing that the needs are going to change, and so if you start planning now, maybe you can meet the community where it's going to need different data in 3 to 6 months.
During the hurricane, we kind of rely on the data that the federal government, federal agencies were able to provide. But after the hurricane, gradually, because of the relationship building, we talked to all the agencies and organizations in Houston, asking about what data they have, whether they're willing to share. And also, I mentioned earlier, the philanthropic foundations, they were able to put together a consortium of researchers and identify all the reliable data sources. So that way, because we have the infrastructure built, which is called the Urban Data Platform, it has like 2 components. One is HIPAA compliant system, which is secure, which will enable researchers to use multiple data sets within that computing environment, but it is more restricted in a way. Another component which we are building now, for example, the Harvey data portal is using the AWS system to provide data to share with others. It's provide a downloadable link. The data that is shareable with general public. Another thing I want to mention is that definitely there are a lot of negotiation with data sharing agreements. Because individual level data, we understand the privacy of it, and so within the data sharing agreement, we want to make sure that we put the term that allow us to republish the data at an aggregate level to share with others.
Which a little bit comes back to your point, Denice. The difference between doing this in 2005 and 2017 is.
Hey. Real quick, are there places where these emergency preparedness conversations are already happening that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, that we could plug into those? Like agencies that do this stuff already, or these,
I think there's networks like Rockefeller's 100 Resilient Cities network, and a lot of the lessons coming out of that. I think NNIP has a potential to be one of those networks. There's an Urban Sustainability Directors Network that's very robust. It's got over 100 cities that are participating who have sustainability directors in them, and it's a very data-driven network as well. So I think there's opportunity for NNIPs as permanent civic infrastructure to help activate some of these existing networks across the country.
Question over here.
Yeah, you touched on this a bit throughout, but I wanted you to address this more directly. What do you see to be the overlapping and maybe divergent data and types of tools that you would need for preparedness, relief, and recovery, and whether or not you see it ideally as being something that's totally integrated, or that these are so separate that they should require their own own tools and sort of sets of data?
For preparedness, especially if you're looking at the public and stressed out civil servants and nonprofit folks, using tools that people already have. But if they're on Facebook, Twitter, social media, so finding a way to plug into the tools that people are already using to chart the path for their recovery. I think that's the most user-centered approach. Building a new app for resilience and recovery probably isn't going to solve any real problems on the preparedness side. I'm a big believer in the power of thin, lightweight apps that have a defined life cycle that you will decommission when they're no longer needed, and thinking in a more lightweight way about the data products that you're producing that meet the immediate needs that are there, that's going to hit that sweet spot of being able to change the conversation between citizens and the government and the nonprofit sector. So prioritizing for those high impact tools and either providing the data or building the tools yourself to help get the community over the hump for that phase, then decommission the app and build a new one. The large sort of kitchen sink approach to data can get very complicated, and it divorces the user experience from the data sources, and I think it removes some agency from the data owners. And I'd love to see an ecosystem where all of the people who own data that's relevant to a recovery are being responsible about making sure that data is open and transparent and well documented with the strengths and limitations and keeping it up to date. That type of ecosystem, I think, would be the most resilient for the long term.
Jay, do you have anything you wanted to add?
What I see that many organizations are using ArcGIS online to map the information that they have, and we were in conversation with Esri during and after hurricane, and they were trying to put together a good library of Harvey-related information. And so, because they have the capacity to assessing the quality of the product and also provide the data documentations. So I see that that's a good way. In the longer term, we consider providing more trainings to community organizations to help build a capacity so that their staff were able to create maps for their decision making rather than relying on research institutions or third party to do it.
One question back here.
Yeah, actually, just a little information. You had asked a question about how else you could possibly get involved. There's a huge movement in the geospatial field, technology industry right now in addressing these issues. Let me give you a federal example of how you could get involved, and then I'll give you a couple of state and regional and national options as well. On the federal side, how many of you are familiar with FEMA's Risk Map program? Risk Map is the next stage from when you talk about the FEMA maps, I think you're talking about the FEMA flood insurance rate maps. Risk Map is an update process for that, but its real intent is to engage communities. That's FEMA's stated intent. And they have plenty of meetings with communities to get their involvement, because their interpretation of those maps is if they're not embraced by the communities and actions aren't taken, then they've really not done anything useful. The person to reach out to in your states to learn about those is the state has a mitigation officer. So contact your State Department of Homeland Security or Emergency Management. The name of the agency varies from state to state. Reach out to that person, tell them you're involved, are interested in being engaged in the conversations where communities can have input on hazard planning, response, and recovery. In the geospatial organization world, one that I would recommend getting involved with is URISA, the Urban and Regional Information Systems Association. I'm a current board member for that, so if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. A week from now, we're going to be in Jacksonville, Florida. An entire track of the 5-day conference is on emergency management and how communities can contribute and utilize geospatial data, definitely the information that you work with as part of that conversation in dealing with disasters. Most states, including our own here in Indiana, also have equivalent organizations. The Indiana Geographic Information Council is all over this topic. We have breakout groups working on that very thing. And your open data comment, dead on the money. I got a quick plug for my state. I think we're the only one in the country still where every single county has signed an MOU to make their data open. You can go out to the Indiana map right now and download parcels for every single county in our state. Cost you nothing. So it's a great model.
So we definitely plan to have another subject matter expert in the audience today.
I think that's
Jay, if I can just ask you one closing question here. So picture yourself next year. It's the fall 2018 NNIP meeting. What do you want to be talking about up on this panel again? What do you want to share as your story of success, or about how your work has changed?
So definitely there's a learning process, we're learning while working on the needs assessment. I mentioned earlier that we're called to provide more information for the Greater Houston Community Foundation. There are some areas that I'm not familiar with, I'll be honest, and we have researchers with various backgrounds who could contribute to this study. So this is one thing that I think I could share with everyone next year in the fall. And the other thing is that things will be clearer in terms of how to track the recovery progress in the community. And what are the key indicators, so I could share that information with everyone too.
I think the last thing I'll share from this is, when your leader is confused, people are confused. That's my favorite line. I hope somebody's tweeting that or has tweeted it. I think we are wrapping up with the session, and Kathy, you've got information to share with folks.
And if we didn't get to your question, I'm sure they'll be available after. So we're going to take a 15-minute break before heading into our second Ignite session. So come back here at 11:30. Then, is that right?